Turn to the book of Ruth, Ruth chapter 2 tonight. We'll try to get through the whole chapter. One of the things that we've learned, or that we should have learned, I guess, in chapter 1, that when you and I make choices that either do not involve God or goes against God, there will be consequences. And the consequences are there because of God's love. God's a just God. He always works off of justice, but He's also a God of love and compassion. And so, these consequences that may come because we go astray, and yet God always waits, and He's wanting you to come back. He always wants you. He always wanted Israel back here in the Old Testament. And so here's Naomi, her family, Elimelech, her husband, led her family to Moab. Moab is a different culture. They're a different language. They have many idols that they serve as their gods. And so, as they journeyed there because of a famine, and the famine should have got their attention, but it didn't. Just like famines in the world today, nobody pays attention. And so Elimelech takes them there, and with doing that, they lived there 10 years. And in that period of time, Naomi's husband Elimelech dies, and her 2 sons, they die. They married Moabite women. And so Naomi comes back to Bethlehem. And in coming back to Bethlehem, she brought Ruth with her. And as she did that, Naomi had a great influence over this outsider, Ruth. I want you to look real quick, chapter 1, verse 21. This is what Naomi said when she came back. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and with her Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, who returned from the land of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Naomi's name means pleasant. Don't call me Naomi, she said. Call me Mara, bitter. Is she aware that God has dealt with her? And yet, you know what's amazing? Naomi was in subjection to her husband. Think about that. She subjected herself. There was a price to pay. And she's very well knowing that. Chapter 2, verse 1 and 2. Now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I may find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. First off, gleaning. Do you know what gleaning is? Yeah, you're picking up leftovers, or you can even be picking off of good, standing grains and things like that. That was a gleaning. Oh, real quick, before we get any further into it, come back to Leviticus 19 with me, if you would. I want to show you a couple of places to give you a better idea. Leviticus chapter 19. Look at verse 9. Leviticus 19:9. Now when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. Verse 10. Nor shall you glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the needy and for the stranger. I am the Lord your God. What do you learn about God from that? Yeah, He provides for those that are less. That's the kind of God we serve. What do we do in our lives when it comes to our things? I want all that's mine, and I want to gather all that's mine, and I want everything for me. I want everything that I have worked for. Is that the kind of God that we serve? You planted that field. And by the way, when they plant their fields or their vineyards or anything like that, they don't have a tractor to go in there and do the work. They got their team of mules or whatever they use to pull, they do it all by hand. He said, whatever you do, don't you reap to the corners. You leave them. Anything that falls on the ground, you leave it. Don't you pluck everything out of your vineyard. I want everything that has come into me. Look at the difference of our attitude sometimes versus the attitude of God. I will provide. I always have. One of the things that I just see real quick, we need to learn how to be better givers and less takers in everything. This is the kind of God we serve. Because when you're a giver, as God is a giver, you know what He's going to do? He's going to take care of you. He'll make sure you're taken care of. Jump over with me real quick to Deuteronomy chapter 24. 2 books over to your right. Deuteronomy chapter 24. Give you a chance to get there. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, look at verse 24, look at verse 19. When you reap your harvest in your field and have forgotten, you shall not go back and get it. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, for the widow, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive tree, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not go over it again. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I am commanding you today. A sheaf, that's where they would bundle the grain, tied together. They were pretty big. You drop one coming in. What would be the normal reaction? Got to go get that. I worked hard to get that gathered. What does God say about it? Leave it alone. Leave it alone. You're seeing God's care and concern. And this is what the people of God should be. So come back to Ruth chapter 2. Look at verse 1 again, 1 and 2. Now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of the grain after one in whose sight I may find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. Boaz, akin to Elimelech, Naomi's former husband. He's wealthy. I want you to pay close attention. They get back to Bethlehem, a Moabite, and what's the first thing that she wants to do? I want to glean for my mother-in-law where we have something to eat. You get the first picture of the kind of woman Ruth is. Now, what would you do, how difficult would it be to go to a land that you don't speak their language, you don't know their culture at all, and you sure don't know their God except what she gained through Naomi? How difficult would this be? And then knowing that as a Moabite, the Jews have nothing to do with you. What would you be thinking? How difficult. But there's something about Ruth. We'll let it unfold. Verse 3. So she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come upon the portion of a field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "May the Lord be with you." And they said to him, "May the Lord bless you." What do you learn about the heart of Boaz? He's a giver. That's a great point. What else do you learn about the heart of Boaz? He what? He knows the Lord. What else? Does he care? Does he care about the things of God? I mean, he tells these reapers when they're going out to reap the field, that's his field they're working in, you know, may the Lord be with you. I mean, he's very conscious of the things of God, respectful to his own workers. That kind of reminds us a little bit in Colossians chapter 4, verse 1, where Paul told the church at Colossae, "Masters, grant to your slaves justice and fairness, knowing that you too have a master who is in heaven." See, there's something expected out of masters who claim to be a part of God. And you need to have some fairness and some justice. Do you see that in Boaz? Sure can. And so this is a quality of people that are tied to God. Continue on. Look at verse 5. Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" The servant in charge of the reapers replied, "She is a young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab." And she said, "Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." Thus she came and has remained from the morning until now. She has been sitting in the house for a little while. Do the people of Bethlehem know Ruth? Do they know about her? Yeah, they know what? Yeah. Yes, they know she's Moabite. And she came with Naomi. And so here, Boaz workers tells her, hey, she wanted to ask if she could come in after the reapers. Well, let's just look. She's a hard worker, you know. She's known. Now, I want you to notice from this point. I want you to notice she lost her husband too. Living in a foreign land, knows nothing about. But she's willing. And it's interesting when you go back and read through chapter 1 again, where she tells Naomi, your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. She has a heart, a desire, a willingness. And I want you to notice, we talked about the book of Ruth as a book of what it means to be faithful or to have faithfulness to the Lord. You're seeing it right here. And God notices faithfulness. Verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this one, but stay here with my maids. Let your eye be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. When you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw." Gleaners are not allowed to be part of the servants, part of the reapers, part of the maids. They were not allowed. Ruth is a Moabitess, an enemy of the Jews, and yet what do you see Boaz doing? Showing what? Favor. Showing favor. Absolutely right. And you know, even being an outsider, he respects her. He's showing her. And it goes so far, she is allowed to drink from the jars of the workers among the Jews. You don't do that to an outsider. And you leave her alone. No one touch her. Boy, that would be hard. That would be hard if you were a Jew, the way they hated things. You know what I saw in this? Throw this out on the side. Do you remember in John 4, Jesus encountered a Samaritan woman at the well? And what did he do to her when he first encountered her? Yeah. Could I have a drink of water? Would you draw me some? How did she respond to that? Yeah, he treats her with kindness and respect, and then he tells her in John chapter 4, verse 9, that how is it that you, being a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan, for a drink? Because Jews had no dealings with Samaritans. Jews have no dealings with Moabites. And you see Boaz has the very same attitude that Jesus had toward the woman at the well. Except Boaz says, you get right in there, you drink with them. You get right in there and you work with them. And leave her alone. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Ron.
I understand gleaning here. Ruth was gleaning for herself. Reapers were harvesting for Boaz.
Yes.
So
yes.
they could look at her almost as a thief, even though she's going behind him.
Right.
Boaz does not see it that way. And in fact, later on, he lets her glean among the reapers.
Right.
So not behind them after they had already picked her.
Right. Ron makes a great point that being a gleaner, and she's behind, he said maybe, they could feel like that she's kind of a thief. But remember what God commanded? You leave some of the things behind for people to glean, even the foreigner. And so here she is. But you know what Boaz begins to do? He begins to include her. How would that make you feel, being of a completely different culture and language and belief system? Thankful? Yeah. So Boaz has the same spirit that Jesus had with the Samaritan woman. And she's shocked. Continue. Look at verse 10. Therefore she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me, since I'm a foreigner? Oh, how does she respond to Boaz's kindness? I mean, can you imagine falling on your face to the ground? Bowing? Gratitude, thankful, yes, yeah. And notice the question. Something struck me as today when I was reading back through it again. She asked there in verse 10, Why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me, since I'm a foreigner? You know what that sounds like? Why should God take notice of you? Why should God take notice of any of us? Is He obligated? We could turn that whole thing around. You didn't get your standing before God because you're a special person. And God took notice. And God brought you into part of who He is. Boaz does the same thing. And she wants to know, why would you take notice of me?
Reaching out of gift.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Jesus did that with the rich young ruler. He looked on him as well.
Right.
Even though he knew what that rich young ruler would do, his decisions and that, what his heart did, which is riches. But he still extended that love and mercy towards them.
Yes. Even, like I said, even to the rich young ruler, he says that Jesus did the same thing. But here's the, yes, sir, go ahead, Jerry. What's that?
We're all God's children anyway.
We are?
We're all God's children.
In the standpoint of mankind. Right?
Right.
God created mankind, but mankind are not all part of God. God created mankind. And that's what you're saying. Yes. But they're not all there. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Ken.
Brent, the thing I like about Boaz, and I guess because I was a sociology major in college, Brent was not Brent, Boaz, sorry, Brent, Boaz was an investigator. He heard about her, he studied her, he knew what she had done, and when he found out what she had done, and he studied it and looked at it, and that's why he told her, he said in verse 10, Lord, I'm helping you out because I heard about what you did. You stayed with Naomi, you did this, you did that, you did this. And so Boaz wasn't a dummy. I mean,
Right.
he did some investigation and he looked into things.
Yes.
He found out that the kind of woman that she was, he had no difficulty saying, hey girl, he said that. But, he said, hey, this is who you are, and this is what I found out about you, girl, and hey.
Right. And now you jumped ahead to verse 11. We hadn't got there yet. But that's okay because you're making a parallel, a good point with it. Go ahead, Ray.
Boaz was showing compassion just like Jesus did to the Samaritan. But we got to remember, too, that he was a family member of Elimelech,
Yes.
who was Naomi's husband who died.
Yes.
So that's probably why he investigated it.
Yes.
And got into it because he's kind of related to it.
Right. And Ray makes a point that he by investigating, he did it because he too is of the family of Elimelech. That's kinsman. He knows that. And yet we get back in this whole thing. We ought to learn a lesson of what the Lord expects from you and me. Because who are we that He showed favor to? We need to see that.
Well, also, one quick thing, on the fields, there's all sides of humbleness. The one rich people, the needy for the poor, and also for the poor, who are working that stuff that the rich people don't They
Yep.
don't expect them to be together, they go out and work and clean.
Yeah, right. And you're talking about humility. Humility was the key here, is what you're saying.
Teaches both sides to be humble.
Yes, yes, you do.
One relies on the other.
Right. But when you're humble, you gain a lot from God, a lot of favor. Verse 11, let's keep going. She asked the question, why should you take notice of me? Verse 11. Boaz replied to her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me. And now, how you left, your father and your mother in the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. Verse 12. May the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. What does Boaz recognize about her? Why is she there? Absolutely. She's there because of God. Naomi had an impact on her. We don't know what depth it was, but there was an impact. That's why last week we talked about, women, especially mothers with their in-laws, need to have a godly impact on them. Need to do that. Go ahead, Karen. Well, now, where were they living? They were living in Bethlehem. Well, right here it says Jefferson City, Bethlehem. No, Bethlehem is the city. And there's the birthplace of Jesus. And first time we got it mentioned here in the Bible. But Bethlehem, the fields were outside of Bethlehem. Okay? No, they're not homeless. Well, I'm assuming they left when they left 10 years earlier. They had a place to come back to. Okay? So they just went to Moab because there was a famine in Israel. So they had their place. And so here he recognizes that what she's done, that she's come to seek refuge under the wings of God, the God of Israel. And don't you think God notices that? Wouldn't you think it? It's going to bring great benefits in your life when you respond rightly. And also, Boaz recognizes God is the real supplier of everything. The real supplier. And so maybe a lot of our problems today come because we do not really believe God is the true supplier. That's why we grab for everything we can get. Everything that's mine. I want it. Let's keep going. Verse 13. Then she said, I have found favor in your sight, my Lord. For you have comforted me and indeed have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants. Here's the turning point for Ruth. You're treating me like one of your own, and I'm not. I know that. You've spoken kindly. In Romans chapter 2, verse 4, you know what he tells about God to bring people to himself? Do you not know that the kindness of God leads people to repentance? It's not about shoving stuff down their throat. It's about kindness. And that's what he had toward her. And now she recognizes, I found favor, even though I'm not like anyone of your maidservants? I'm not like the people of Israel. So here's her turning point. Verse 14. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here, that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar." So she sat and ate beside the reapers. And he served her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied and had some left. Guess where she's sitting now? She's with the reapers. She's right in the very middle of the servants of Boaz. Oh, well. And by the way, where do you think all this started with Ruth? She began to ask about going to foreign people who did not like Moabites to take care finding food for Naomi. She showed that to Naomi at all cost to herself. And now, what is she getting? Same thing back. You think this is all by coincidence? I don't think it's coincidence, not for the people of God. And not for a woman that's showing some faith toward God. Go ahead, Richard.
There's an aspect here too, you know, Ruth had decided before they left Moab that she would live with her mother, for God would be her God. She had made a commitment to that and to care for her. Her commitment was not about her mother taking care of her. Her mother was about her taking care of her mother as well.
Yes.
She regarded her mother.
Mm-hmm.
And coming in Bethlehem, probably being small, as what her reputation was known
Right.
as a godly person. Boaz recognized that and he blesses her. And also, where we talked about Judges, you know, like you talked last week about how everyone did what they wanted to do, there's still a remnant that's going to do what God says.
Mm-hmm.
Because Boaz is following the old law there in Deuteronomy where it says you will not oppress a hard servant or who is poor and needy, whether he's a countryman or one of your aliens. You know, there was a Mosaical law about what you do with aliens who will stay in your country.
Yes.
So, but he's showing godliness in keeping God's law. So there's always a remnant. There are people there.
Yes.
Her reputation precedes her, which protects her.
That's a good point Richard's making, because he is showing godliness, and guess what? She's willing to accept the true God. She came from an idol-worshiping faith, and now she's turned. And there is, as Richard said, there's always this remnant. And Boaz is part of that because he believes in some of these things that the Lord had spoken. Move to verse 15. When she arose to glean, Boaz commanded his servant, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not insult her. Also you shall purposely pull out for her some grain from the bundles, and leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her." What does Boaz know about the Jews? They could insult her real easily. They could cast, have a condescending attitude toward her because she's a Moabite, and you're not to seek their prosperity, he said, all the days of their lives, And now, here he is. He's telling his own servants, don't you insult this woman. Leave her alone. Now, Boaz is wealthy. I wonder how God provided with this kind of an attitude, because a lot of times people have a lot of wealth. They don't have that spirit about them. And so here's Boaz, verse 17. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. She took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also took it out and gave Naomi what she had left after she was satisfied. Naomi had eaten earlier, but she had more than enough, and what did she do? She brings it to Naomi. I said Ruth, sorry. Ruth brings it to Naomi. And now you've got an ephah, just for your information, just a little bit more than a bushel. And one ephah would feed 2 people for 5 to 6 days. So how much ahead has she gotten? Well, it's a neat story. Ruth's a neat lady. And she's not even been converted yet. But she's on the converted stage. She's in that process. She's doing it. And Boaz is helping it along. Kindness. Verse 19. Her mother-in-law then said to her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? May he who took notice of you be blessed." Look at Naomi's attitude. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz." Verse 20. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed of the Lord, who has not withdrawn his kindness to the living and to the dead." Again, Naomi said to her, "The man is our relative. He is one of our closest relatives." Notice Naomi, what's happened to her. May he be blessed of the Lord. What was her attitude before? Bitter. The Lord's done this to us. I went out full, now I've come back empty. Now what's Naomi doing? You don't think God can work everything out even if you're in a difficult situation and things look bad? And Ruth, the Moabitess, is having a great influence on her mother-in-law, who is already part of the people of God. And now she's blessing their kinsman, their closest of Elimelech, Boaz. And so she came back bitter, and now she's singing praises. Continue on. Verse 21. Then Ruth the Moabitess said, "Furthermore, he said to me, you should stay close to my servants until they have finished all my harvest." 22. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, daughter, that you go out with his maids, so that others do not fall upon you in another field." What is Naomi aware that could happen from the Jews? They could hurt her. So you stay right where Boaz told you. 23. So she stayed close by the maids of Boaz in order to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. And she lived with her mother-in-law. What do you think? Isn't it a wonderful thing to see God working this? And see an attitude of what it means to be faithful, and see how the Lord responds to that? It's kind of like this. And Carrie had touched on it Sunday morning. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 4, Paul told them, "Do not merely look out for your own personal interest, but also for the interest of..." We know that verse. You want to see it play out right here? How do you think God feels about that? When you start looking out for the interest of other people and stop hoarding for yourself. looking out for yourself. And we're seeing how God feels about all of that. Any questions? That's a great story. I don't even like to call it a story. It's not a story. It's a fact. This happened. And it happened in one of the darkest times of the history of Israel. And you see God shining, the brightest among all. It ought to give us pause to think about what happened and go back and read that again. And it ought to give us pause. Why should God take notice of you? Give me one reason God should bless you and I. I want one reason. Jesus Christ. That is the only reason. And if you and I aren't being honest with the Lord, you're going to find God's blessings. I don't know. No, you're not. Look out for the interests of others. Yes, sir.
You know, there's another point here too. Boaz was not only good to Naomi and Ruth, and she was also to the living and the dead. He was also taking care of Elimelech, his kinsman, even though he was dead.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point Ron makes, because Boaz did recognize that he is taking help to the household of Elimelech, his kinsman. That's a good point. Thank you. Okay, well, we're going to leave Naomi and Ruth in a good spot. And in 2 weeks, we'll come back and we'll see where he takes us from here. Thank you all so much.
Praising myself.